Shalom and welcome to the Israel Policy Pod. I'm Neri Zilber, a journalist based in Tel Aviv and a policy advisor to Israel Policy Forum. Chag Sameach, everyone, and happy almost Passover and Easter. With the holidays nearly upon us, I thought it would be a good time to touch base with our dear friend Tal Shalev, the chief political correspondent for Walla News. She and I broke down the recent Netanyahu-Trump summit meeting in Washington this week, the whole deep state conspiracy issue here in Israel, just to be clear, the Qatargate investigation, and we ended with a political check-in on both the state of the Netanyahu coalition and the opposition. This was, as always, a wide-ranging and free-flowing conversation, so let's get to Tal Shalev. Hi, Tal. Welcome back to the podcast.
Hi, Neri. How are you?
I'm doing okay, Tal, but you know as well as I do that Passover is just a few days away. Just for the record, we're recording this on Wednesday afternoon Tel Aviv time, so really just a few more days, and then the holidays, as they're called here, will be upon us. How are you feeling? How are you doing before the Chagim? Any big plans for next week?
Well, never a dull moment, so let's wait and see if the holidays are real holidays or as part of, the whole chaos surrounding us or swifting us. What is supposed to be peaceful and calm Chol HaMoed will not, it could turn into something less peaceful and calm. I personally also have, a struggle with the holidays as long as the hostages are still in Gaza, especially, a holiday like Passover, which is all about freedom.
Right.
So a constant tension between, the need to lead a normal life and to, breathe and do things that are outside of day-to-day politics, and between the fact that, we're in a very abnormal situation. So that's a constant tension, which I think we'll be dealing with next week as well.
Definitely a constant tension every day for the past 18 months. And some would say even before the past 18 months, even before the war, but that's another story. But you're right. I was thinking back to last Pesach, last year, and, there were barely any flights. The war was really still in full swing, unlike now, which is a, very different war. And it seemed like the whole country kind of came together. Dare say a much stronger sense of unity last year. There was an empty chair next to the table for the hostages, a lot of yellow, at least in my family's Passover Seder. And this time it's almost like it's been politicized. Even the hostage issue, which shouldn't be political at all. That was what I was thinking of in terms of the contrast between this year and last year. That the politics have actually come back in a really bad way. But I was going to ask, Tal, what do you know that I don't about Chol HaMoed? It's supposed to be a time of no politics. I think a lot of the politicians are going to be flying away on vacation. What kind of news are you expecting next week?
Alevai, I wish. I mean, I'm just saying this is such a we live in such crazy times. I don't know about anything specific. I'm just saying,
okay.
As I know the tempo of my work, I'll be grateful if all of the politicians take a month away. A month. They can take a month vacation.
Right.
But unfortunately, we live under, the Bibi regime. And the Bibi regime is very hectic and finds it very hard to lay down. It's true that this is an extremely religious government and the Knesset is on vacation, on its spring recess. And even this week, you can start feeling how the country is slowly, slowing down ahead of the holidays. But, I'm just preparing myself for the worst.
Yeah, that's a good way to approach our line of work. Although I will be telling my bosses not here that everything will be completely quiet. Everyone's off. There won't be any news. Let's hope for the best. Fingers crossed.
I'm rooting for you.
Yeah, I'm rooting for me too. I'm looking forward to the Chag. But let's get down to business. And Netanyahu, he was in the White House a few days ago for another summit meeting with Donald Trump, their second in 2 months. This one, I dare say, was a surprise summit. It wasn't planned. Netanyahu was, of course, in Hungary late last week and this past weekend. And then he was called to Washington to talk mostly about tariffs and Iran, but also a little bit about Gaza and Turkey. So first question to you, Tal. You're a veteran of these diplomatic trips. What did you make of this quickie one? It wasn't the best White House visit for Bibi, was it?
To say the least, I would probably rate it amongst, his top five bad visits
Hmm.
to the White House, at least the way, at least from what we know now and, from what was televised, that not very short encounter in the Oval Office, Netanyahu did not evolve from this meeting strengthened or bolstered as he has used his meetings with President Trump in the past. So, the way it was televised here, Netanyahu did not emerge as King Bibi or King America. On the contrary, I think he was quite ambushed there by the president with his comments about the direct talks with Iran, even if it was coordinated in advance and Netanyahu wasn't caught in the dark. This is Netanyahu's thing. This is to talk about. I mean, just like the irony of thinking how Netanyahu would react if President Obama or President Biden would be sitting next to him in the Oval Office and announcing he's opening direct talks with Iran. And, Netanyahu's baby, and one that he has been very much nourishing in the past few months, is an Israeli attack on the Iranian nuclear program. But also the comments about Turkey and Erdogan, which are contrary to statements that Netanyahu and senior Israeli officials have been making about the Turkish influence in the post-Assad Syria.
Mm-hmm.
In that question, in that response, President Trump basically told Netanyahu, well, you got to be reasonable. So I think that at large, it's one of the reasons that Netanyahu, cherishes his White House visits is because of the image it impacts in Israel, the way it's televised in Israel. So this is one of the, I can't remember a visit which was so humiliating for him, at least on the outside. Of course, there might be understandings in the inside that we do not know about, but at least, there's one good thing about President Trump being so eccentric that, the rifts are just out in the open. There's no daylight. So everyone could see exactly that President Trump is holding a press conference with many statements that Netanyahu will not necessarily like. And even the excuse that Netanyahu gave, the main excuse, which was the tariffs, even there, and even though Netanyahu offered to basically succumb to President Trump and remove all tariffs here in Israel and pay back, I don't know what he said there, $4 billion. Even on that issue, which was presented as the primary goal of the trip, Netanyahu didn't come home with any achievement at all.
That's right. It was quite a scene, that hour-long Oval Office, essentially a press conference. So they were sitting there taking questions from a very rowdy, Israeli diplomatic press, and then also the White House press.
Yeah, well, I just want to mention that, there was a real press conference scheduled that was supposed to take place after the meeting, in which I think questions would have been distributed in a more even way, and Netanyahu would probably get more questions about what's happening in Israel while he's abroad, vis-a-vis, the attempt to sack the head of the Shin Bet Security Service and other issues that are burning here today. And I don't know, but I think Netanyahu was the one who wanted to ditch that kind of traditional press conference. And by, having the press conference in the Oval Office, it was totally President Trump's show. And Netanyahu, at least the way I perceived it, was basically just a status there.
Yeah, in English, basically an extra in Trump's Trump's movie or play. That's a really interesting theory. I hadn't actually thought about that. So he wanted it more to be focused on Trump's issues and less the Israeli press asking him.
Well, yes, Netanyahu hasn't given a press conference in Israel in, I don't know, at least over half a year. So it just continues the trend, right? He doesn't want to answer Israeli press questions.
No, the prime minister of this country during wartime, but in general, only communicates with the public via pre-recorded video messages. That's all
Exactly.
We get, and that's obviously not great, not just for journalists, but also for the public. to actually hold their leader to account. But I was going to say it was interesting. I don't think I've ever seen Netanyahu sit quietly without saying anything for so long in a room. I mean, really, and like you said,
Hmm.
even on the Iran issue, if President Obama or President Biden or anyone else other than Trump had sat there and said, "Oh yeah, we're going to negotiate a deal with Iran," I bet we would have gotten a little bit more from Bibi Netanyahu pushing back against that idea. But obviously, Trump, like you said, is eccentric. That's a nice word for it. And also the Turkey issue. I was looking at Netanyahu's body language and face when Trump answered that question. He's like, they're both my friends, and he's looking at Bibi. He's like, yeah, you need to be reasonable. It's like, okay, that's not the messaging, like you said, coming out of the Netanyahu government about Turkey in Syria. Remains to be seen if Trump can mediate that issue. Correct me if I'm wrong. The hostage issue and Gaza in general, almost both leaders basically just kind of skipped over it. It was very general responses, nothing really concrete, right?
Yes. So I did notice President Trump's statement that he hopes that the war will be over in a short matter of time. I don't remember the exact verb, but he did, let's say, at least he did not embrace with full power the Israeli, campaign and preparations for a full-scale attack on Gaza. He was more about we're still trying to end it. Now, I think the most, evident thing for me between the first press conference or the first Netanyahu Trump summit and the second Netanyahu Trump summit is where the president's attention is.
Mm-hmm.
So in the first summit, it was all about the hostages and the Gaza Riviera. In the second summit, he was mainly about Iran and the tariffs. And that's just to show A, the president's attention span, B, how much, credibility we should give to all of these statements. But see it all, and it just shows that the enthusiasm that the administration had when it first entered office in January, which was a big source of hope for the Israeli hostages families. Well, you don't see that anymore. Steve Witkoff has now been appointed to lead the negotiations with Iran. So you're not doing the same thing at the same time, unless I don't know about some secret plan by Witkoff to, enable the release of the hostages through negotiations about the Iranian nuclear program. But I think it was quite striking how, that was on the top of the president's agenda when he entered office. And here we are, I don't know, what is it, 3 months or 4 months later,
Less.
and he's already moved on. And he passed through Russia and Ukraine in the middle, right? So I think that was very striking for me. It's just not on the top of his agenda anymore.
Right. Steve Witkoff, Trump's special envoy, originally to the Middle East and primarily Gaza. Then Witkoff was
apparently to everywhere, right?
Well, that's exactly it. Then he was tasked with bringing peace to Ukraine and the Ukraine-Russia war, and now Witkoff is going to Oman, likely on Saturday, to negotiate with the Iranians. Each one of these global crises would be a massive lift for any diplomat to try to do all three at the same time. That's a lot. So, like you said, it's an issue of attention and bandwidth.
Good luck, right? I'm all for negotiations instead of war. But I just think that, also in Israel, right, Netanyahu kind of dissolved the negotiation team as part of his efforts to undermine the Shin Bet security service. He kind of pushed out the head of the Mossad, and he pushed out Ronen Bar, the head of the head of the Shin Bet, and he assigned, the file of the hostage negotiations to Ron Dermer. And Dermer, just like Witkoff, is involved in, I don't know, 10 other big burning issues. And in that respect, I think the hostages are being neglected and their families are being neglected. And I feel, if on the personal level, to connect where we started our conversation, it's like I feel very much guilty of normalizing, it's not me personally, but I think that this is a process of normalizing an abnormal situation.
Very abnormal situation. And I think the lack of attention and pressure by the Trump administration on the hostage issue, but really the Gaza issue, my conclusion is that they're backing the Netanyahu government's position, which is we're going to resume the war and try to quote unquote apply pressure on Hamas to get Hamas to release hostages without any commitment by Israel to end the war. But
Unless there's something that we don't know, right? It was very interesting to see that a few, just a short while before the Netanyahu-Trump summit, there was a phone call between French President Macron, who was in Egypt with President Sisi and King Abdallah. There is an effort to try and find a way out of the war. And of course, we have to wait. And I mean, President Trump does have a dream of breaking some kind of deal with Saudi Arabia. So I just think we have to wait for the White House attention span to go back there.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, it changes day by day. So tomorrow it might be front and center, and then by Friday, it'll be gone.
Exactly. But remember, the first time Netanyahu was in the White House, the president said he would be going to Saudi Arabia within weeks. And we've been hearing about his trip to Saudi Arabia within weeks. But here, the visit is not completed, is not happening yet. So it might be wishful thinking, but my hope is that ahead of his visit to Saudi Arabia, the president will want to have some achievement in the Middle East, and that could be part of a big deal of ending the war.
Very interesting theory. I think he's supposed to be in Saudi Arabia next month in May at some point. Maybe I'll believe it when I see it, frankly. Like you said, I think there's less going on than people imagine. Obviously, there's still things going on behind the scenes. I don't want to make it seem like there's no diplomacy happening, but all these various reports and leaks, I take with a grain of salt. But I've been wrong before, so I'm willing to be wrong again, especially on this issue, and especially to get the hostages back. And just a final point on the Trump-Bibi summit, the reason he was there, the tariffs, I think that was useful for both parties, right? Trump got the first foreign leader to D.C., to the White House to quote-unquote negotiate over removing the tariffs. Bibi was very happy to be the first foreign leader to be there and talk about all these other issues on the agenda. But in terms of brass tacks and tachlis, I think that Netanyahu said afterwards, yeah, we're going to work to close or eliminate the trade deficit between the U.S. and Israel. Now, I work for a quasi-financial newspaper called the Financial Times. We looked into this. It's nearly impossible. Like, Israel doesn't really import all that much from America, and it exports to America certain things, and that's the reason why there's a deficit. And even before this government in Israel took away all the tariffs on American imports, it was already, I think, 95 or 99% gone for years. So I'm not quite sure what Netanyahu can do to appease Trump on the tariff issue.
Another thing that struck me watching that meeting that probably didn't get enough attention here in Israel was that statement by Trump when he told Netanyahu, we're already giving Israel $4 billion a year.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the focus needs to be on the next MOU, which, under any other administration, I would say it shouldn't be a problem. But since this administration, is in the midst of, a trade war with other countries and is unconventional, then I think Israel should be looking much more seriously into to start and open the next MOU negotiations, because given, some of Trump's statements, it doesn't seem like he necessarily will give us everything that we got from the Obama administration. And if so, he will probably ask for things in exchange because he is a deal maker.
That's a great point, Tal. And I think out of anything that should worry the Israeli, public, but definitely the Israeli government more than anything, the fact that Trump is A, definitely transactional, and B, is definitely aware of the fact that the U.S. provides, $3.8 billion a year in defense aid to Israel as part of this memorandum of understanding, basically, the U.S.-Israel defense deal, defense pact, whatever you want to call it. And it expires in 2028, and it takes a long time to negotiate these things. And it's not all clear to me, and it shouldn't be a given to anyone here in Israel that Trump will re-up and provide the same level of military support to Israel. Like you said, what do we get out of it? We already give you $4 billion, so you need to
Exactly.
give us something. Yeah, that could be a very rude awakening for Israelis and for this Israeli prime minister. But moving right along, Tal, one thing Netanyahu and Trump likely agreed on was this whole idea, concept, conspiracy of deep states. You probably were watching, as I was, yesterday, Tuesday, at the Supreme Court in Jerusalem. A hearing took place over whether the government can or cannot fire Golan, as you said, the head of the Shin Bet, the domestic intelligence agency. The judges in the case basically punted and gave both sides a few more weeks to find a compromise on this very important issue of, who's going to be running this internal security agency. Will Netanyahu be able to appoint someone maybe more to his liking? And it's not clear and remains to be seen whether the government will actually adhere to the ruling, meaning that they can't replace Barr before April 20th. So a few more weeks to find this compromise. But I think the larger point is that Netanyahu is now very clearly in open warfare with the Shin Bet, after he's already gone after the courts, the attorney general, the police, the army, the media. I'm sure I'm missing something or someone, but basically all the institutions of state here, and calling it a deep state conspiracy against him and his government. We've seen this movie before in other places, but knowing what you know about Netanyahu, how far do you think he will take all of this in terms of his battle against what he calls the deep state here?
Well, first of all, I think he's taken it quite far.
Yeah.
So up until now, right? He's the first prime minister to be convicted in, a criminal court, not convicted, indicted, of course, in a criminal court. And since 2017, when the investigation started, 2016, 2017, he has been basically waging a war against the state. And you could include everything that has happened to us inside that, if it's the attacks against the police and then the justice ministry and the 5 election campaigns and the judicial overhaul, which is government is promoting. So I think the deep state is basically, a good slogan for something that Netanyahu has been doing for many, many years, even before he knew it was called the deep state. And he's just moved from, after the judicial overhaul, he's basically now in the midst of a security overhaul. And of course, he is inspired by President Trump and Elon Musk, whom he meets regularly during his Washington visits. And when he came back from his first Washington visit in February, he did fuel his attempts to sack both Ronen Bar, the Shin Bet Security Service head, and Gali Baharav Miara, the Attorney General. So far, it seems that the Supreme Court, or at least on the case of Ronen Bar, the Supreme Court is protecting, or at least trying to protect, Ronen Bar. This is quite a, peculiar situation, I have to admit. There are dozens of thousands of Israelis who have protested in the streets in the name of democracy and the name of the head of the Secret Service, Ronen Bar, which is quite a peculiar situation in which only Netanyahu could have created. As I said, an abnormal situation. But Netanyahu has been wanting to fire Ronen Bar basically since the summer as part of a big plan to replace all of the top security at Golan and have a much more loyal and agreeable top security brass. Over the years, you probably should, or you might, or you could, or you should write a book about Netanyahu's relationships with the head of the security services, whether it's the army or the Shin Bet or the Mossad. Specifically, the Shin Bet, Netanyahu has a very bad history with Shin Bet heads. Almost all of them who have served under Netanyahu have came out against him in the past few years in one way or another and warned that he is a danger to democracy.
On that point, I have to interject. It's not just the Shin Bet chiefs. It's, I think, literally every IDF chief of staff going back to the 90s has come out against him.
True. It's also the defense ministers. There's no defense minister.
And most of the Mossad chiefs. It's literally every security chief going back probably 30 years have come out and said, yeah, this guy is a danger to, Israeli democracy in the country. Even the ones like Bogi Alon, who was IDF chief of staff, and Yoav Gallant, who wasn't chief of staff but a senior general and then defense minister, obviously. Both of them are now his biggest critics, and they were in the Likud. So I don't think there's one exception.
There are some exceptions in the Mossad. I think Yossi Cohen and
Give it time.
is part of an exception, perhaps the current Mossad chief. But yes, there's basically almost no exception. And some of these former Shin Bet chiefs are now coming out and explaining exactly why they say he's giving the explanations why they think he's a danger to democracy, and that is because Netanyahu has no limits and has no borders, and has asked them over the years to do things that are for his political and personal benefit and have nothing to do with security. Even just, the most simple example, right, is Netanyahu's constant, it's not Netanyahu himself, it's the Netanyahu family, constant demands, growing demands from the Shin Bet security service just to, to secure them and their households. And, you have Yair Netanyahu, his eldest son, in Miami with 3 Shin Bet bodyguards. And at the same time, he is spreading conspiracy theories against the Shin Bet, who didn't wake up his father on the 7th of October. So basically, this is a culmination. If this, this event or this fiasco with Ronen Bar is a culmination of so many inner battles that Netanyahu has been waging against the Shin Bet in the past few years. And again, he just has no borders. He has no limits anymore. So as part of his current battle against Ronen Bar, he has been, leaking confidential letters written by Ronen Bar, something that has never happened. I don't remember anything like it. The prime minister leaking personal correspondence with the head of the Shin Bet security service. And he has been spreading conspiracy theories, trying to, brush off the Qatargate scandal and with whataboutism and kind of stain Ronen Bar. And of course, the main thing that he's trying to do is that he's trying to portray Ronen Bar, and not only Ronen Bar, also Herzi Halevi and the army, as, responsible for the 7th of October and to shed all responsibility himself.
Bingo.
So all of this is like a perfect storm happening right now in Israel. And of course, you have the Supreme Court involved and embroiled now, and that brings in the other storm, which is, Netanyahu's government relentless attempt to weaken the Supreme Court and threaten, undermine its authority and undermine its decisions. So we really are in the midst of, I think, one of the biggest internal storms that we've seen in Israel, probably, just like before the 7th of October during the judicial overhaul. And this is all happening, of course, when Netanyahu plans to send the army, or at least has plans to send the army for another war, while, Israel is once again shattered down or being challenged internally by these internal fights and divisions.
This is why I said, in a weird way, last Passover was, as difficult as it was, and it was difficult, I don't want to sugarcoat it, was more uplifting and unifying, just in terms of the overall vibe here in Israel than this Passover, which...
So, my test, my sad test, is actually the, Yom HaAtzmaut, which will be next month, in a month by now.
Independence
less than
Day.
a month from here. The Independence Day, and of course the day before, which is the Memorial Day for the bereaved soldiers, which was extremely difficult in 2023 before the war, in the midst of the judicial overhaul. It was extremely difficult in 2024 with hundreds of new soldiers who were killed in the war and the hostages above. And it's going to be even more difficult this year when, the scenes yesterday in the Supreme Court, which were quite unbelievable, of shouting in the Supreme Court, are going to probably might repeat themselves in some of the cemeteries. And these are very, heartbreaking days for Israeli society and consciousness.
It is. But like you said, I think this year will be even more difficult, not only because another year of war has passed, but because the consensus that we had last year has been broken, deliberately so. And Tal, you may not remember this, but I do. Back in 2023, I was writing an article, I forget for who, about the judicial overhaul and the tech protest and the economic protest and the reservists refusing to report for duty, and basically everything was looking like it was heading off a cliff here. And you told me, you posed it as a question. It's like, Netanyahu essentially is destroying everything he's built over 3 decades, more or less, at the top of this country, running this country. And there was no clear answer as to why. It just was, for all the reasons we just discussed.
Israel Policy Forum is a policy organization rooted in the Jewish community. Our mission is to build support for a secure, Jewish, democratic Israel through a viable resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, advancing pragmatic U.S. policy towards the conflict, U.S.-Israel relations, and regional diplomacy among policymakers and community leaders. We promote policy measures endorsed by credible security experts, develop analysis and commentary, and convene programs that engage and educate leaders across the political, denominational, and generational spectrums. Our Young Professionals initiative, IPF at Teed, works to elevate the discourse among next-generation leaders by building community and facilitating engaging programs related to Israeli-Palestinian affairs. To learn more about our work, visit us online at israelpolicyforum.org and follow us on social media. If you rely on Israel Policy Forum for credible and nuanced analysis, please make a tax-deductible gift today at ipf.li/supportthepod or at the Support the Show link in the show notes.
So I actually have the answer now.
Okay.
Why he's doing it for his own political and personal survival. Just as, I think in many ways, the post 7th of October Netanyahu is a ruthless and reckless leader who will, and we've seen it in so many examples. If it's, the budget, the very fat budget, which mainly is fat for his sectorial partners to keep his coalition together, and the way that he has, turned the hostages issue into a political issue, and the way he is prolonging the war in order to keep his coalition together. So I think I understand why Netanyahu is willing to today. I understand why Netanyahu is willing to tear down everything that is good in this country's fabric, because it's what keeps him in power.
Yeah, I guess that's the most direct and obvious answer. It just, I don't know. It seems insane to want to burn this place down so you can rule over the ashes, to borrow a quote from Game of Thrones. By the way, we saw it yesterday. I kind of alluded to this, the scenes at the Supreme Court for the Ronen Bar hearing. I'm pretty sure Netanyahu sent in supporters, and in some cases, yes, bereaved families of the fallen, to go in and yell at the judges, to yell at the former Shin Bet chief and the former Mossad chief and the former police commissioner who showed up to the hearing. And they were yelling at them, and by the way, the judges, you're responsible for October 7th. You're responsible. As if there was no prime minister here on October 7th, 2023. It all seemed very, very orchestrated, and yet another brick in the wall here, going after institutions of the state. Tal, we have to get into Qatargate, because I get asked about this more often than anything else over the past few weeks, because it's a hugely complicated story and case. But basically, it involves at least 2 or maybe more Netanyahu advisors, Yonatan Ulrich, his main political advisor, and Eli Feldstein, Bibi's former military spokesperson, by the way, after October 7th, 2023, and allegations that they received money from Qatar to allegedly lobby on their behalf or improve their image in Israel, as they were working in the Prime Minister's office. This is very important. They were working in the Prime Minister's office, and again,
one of them, at least we know. We only know at this point about Eli Feldstein getting money while he was working in the Prime Minister's office.
Correct, right. they're investigating whether Ulrich actually received money, and that needs to be shown. But I guess to start off with this, when your family or friends come to you, Tal, and ask, okay, what is this Qatargate scandal? How do you explain it to them so that they understand it?
Well, I have to say that I think that Qatargate, the big thing about it is, and it might be even intentional in a way, is that people get confused in the details. So when people ask me about Qatargate, I try to take like a mile from above
Mm-hmm.
and say the real issue of Qatargate is how the prime minister's office is handled and managed today, how it does not keep confidentiality rules at all, and it does not succumb to security considerations at all. And it's more like we say in Hebrew, shchuna, which is a neighborhood. It's more like a hood
Mm-hmm.
than the place where the most important decisions in the country are supposed to be made. Because at the end of the day, this is a story about Eli Feldstein and Jonathan Ulrich, who is closer to Netanyahu and has been with him for many years, and perhaps other advisors who are not direct employees of the prime minister's office. But still, they are part of the prime minister's entourage and walk daily into the office. So the issue is Eli Feldstein, who was Netanyahu's spokesperson, even though he didn't pass a security clearance, and why was he still there, and how was he paid, and how was this approved? And the issue is, if Jonathan Ulrich is a private contractor of Netanyahu, then how is it possible that he can also get, perhaps, or at least allegedly, be involved with other countries? And the issue of Qatar itself, I think it's a bit more complicated. Because Qatar is complicated. It's not just an enemy country. It's not even defined by law as an enemy country. But it's also a country who has an extremely complex relationship with Israel and with the whole world. And Israel, as a country, has been playing a double game with Qatar under Netanyahu for many, many years. And I'm not sure that it necessarily has a connection, right? But there are many, many questions in the air about the whole policy that Netanyahu decided to move with the Qatari payments to Gaza. Now,
Mm-hmm.
we know, you and I know, Neri, that the reason there were Qatari payments to Gaza, or the reason they were enhanced, was because Netanyahu was keen on weakening the Palestinian Authority, and he had to find a way to keep Gaza from, falling apart or bursting when the Palestinian Authority stopped paying its officials inside Gaza. So, in my opinion, there are a lot of things embroiled in Qatargate, but the big question, if we put aside the question of the concept and about the policy regarding Qatar, which is not a criminal question, it is a question. It might be a question for a national inquiry committee, which Netanyahu refuses to establish.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure it has any connection with the criminal aspect, or at least not the one that is currently being investigated. There are, of course, many questions here in Israel about the Raven documents that some of them allegedly show that Netanyahu himself was paid dozens of billions of dollars by the Qatari. We don't know if these documents are real. They haven't been authenticated.
I don't believe it personally.
Again, I don't know here or there, but definitely there are many, many points that are unconnected. And I'm not sure that they will be connected, but at least in the Israeli public conscience, they're currently being connected all the time. Because, it's not clear where this investigation is leading. And B, because Netanyahu will not have a national inquiry, or he won't even answer questions about Qatar. He'll only say on camera that Qatar is a complicated country, even though he himself had anti-Qatari messages during the war. So, sometimes Netanyahu had the interest of strengthening Qatar sometimes, and sometimes he had an interest in weakening Qatar. But at large, I think it's part of the same thing that we talked about earlier. It's the fact that Netanyahu has no moral limits, Netanyahu and his surroundings have no more moral limits. And the most important security decision making, is not necessarily made on security reasons, but rather on small political interests. And I think that's the essence of the Qatargate.
Again, leaving aside the prime minister himself, whether his aides were kind of double dipping and benefiting on the side from clients like Qatar as they were advising the prime minister. And what was it, last week, Netanyahu said, well, Yonatan Urich, he's a political advisor in the Likud party, trying to make it seem like Urich wasn't an advisor in the prime minister's office. I think it's very clear legally that he is a government employee. Feldstein was working in the prime minister's office. How Feldstein was getting paid, I think, is of critical importance in this case. Whether Urich or someone else in the prime minister's office set up the payment from Qatar via an American lobbyist so that it would reach Feldstein. All of that still remains to be seen. And yes, look, if it's shown, if there's proof that Urich or again someone else was arranged this payment to circumvent, whatever government, ethics rules were in place, and they got Qatar to pay Feldstein, I mean that's unbelievable. I think leaving aside the question of whether Ulrich and maybe someone else were getting paid by Qatar for PR purposes as they were working for the prime minister.
It's unbelievable, even without, even just from what we know, it's unbelievable that Eddie Feldstein, while he was working in the prime minister's office, whether he was getting money or not, or who was paying him, he was physically working there. It's unbelievable that at the same time he would help Qatar spread its messages. And I dare to, we don't know what will come out of this Pandora box, because this all, the Qatargate, and this is also worth reminding, is came out of the Pandora box of a different of the previous Feldstein affair,
scandal,
in which Feldstein has already been indicted in court, and Ulrich is also very strongly involved, which has to do with that attempt, the leak to the Bild about the alleged Hamas strategy memo.
That's exactly right. So this, I dare say, again, I think it's kind of common sense that the Qatargate scandal came out of this prior scandal from last fall, where Feldstein, along with someone inside the military, stole classified documents, leaked it to the prime minister's advisors, who then gave it to the German newspaper, the Bild, to get it out in the kind of the bloodstream of the international media, in order to undermine the movement here to get the hostages back, to kind of solidify the arguments by Netanyahu and his camp that Hamas was not willing to release hostages, that it may even be trying to smuggle hostages across the Philadelphia corridor into Egypt. And in that sense, it defended and upheld Netanyahu's argument that Israel couldn't leave the Philadelphia corridor. Again, we're getting into the weeds, but there was a previous scandal involving classified materials, leaks, and basically influence operations by allegedly the prime minister's office against the Israeli public.
Yep.
Yeah. Like we said, it's complicated, but I think we did hopefully a reasonable job trying to explain the broad strokes of it, and remains to be seen what can be proven and what can't be proven. Before we finish up, Tal, let's do a little bit of a political check-in ahead of Passover spring break. Let's start with the government, with the Netanyahu coalition. A few weeks ago, they very easily passed a budget that was big for them and likely gives them another year in power. Itamar Ben-Gvir even came back from exile, from Bruges, into the coalition after he left the government over the Gaza ceasefire deal back in late January. So the coalition is now back to full strength. What do you expect their priorities to be for the summer session? Is it the whole issue of the ultra-Orthodox military conscription issue? Is it the judicial overhaul? I mean, what do you expect from the coalition in the next couple of months?
So the first and foremost issue on coalition's table is, of course, the conscription crisis. Netanyahu basically has been promising the ultra-Orthodox parties over 2.5, almost 2 years and a half, that he's going to pass a conscription bill. This was one of their conditions, their prime conditions of joining the government. They were supposed to, according to their coalition agreements, this bill was supposed to be passed and approved before the first budget. And since then, Netanyahu has passed 5 budgets, and each time the ultra-Orthodox parties, or at least part of them, come out with some kind of ultimatum, and eventually they drop the ultimatum. That happened just last month again, the budget. And now supposedly there's another ultimatum, and the Haredi leaders are saying that if there won't be a bill or any progress with the bill within the next 2 weeks, or until the Knesset comes back from recess next month, then they will vote against the coalition. So that's one issue on the table. There have been tireless.
Do you believe the ultra-Orthodox?
I don't believe the ultra-Orthodox. I mean, I don't think there'll be a bill, because I think that the minimum that the ultra-Orthodox are willing to consider doesn't reach the minimum that the,
general Israeli public
and some of the Likud and Smotrich people will be willing to accept. So I don't think there will be a bill. And B, I mean, I might believe the ultra-Orthodox parties. I just think that it's not their call. They just got the budget, and they just got all of the money that they need to, compensate for some of the money that has been taken away because of the conscription bill crisis. And I think that essentially the decision whether there will be an early election or not is traditionally has been Netanyahu's, and it'll still stay Netanyahu's decision. And I don't see Netanyahu willingly giving up a year in power. That being said, there's a common assumption that we are entering an election year, because the next budget, the 2026 budget, has to be approved by March 2026. It'll probably be a very difficult budget, just like this one, which will have much tax raises and other bad news for the general public. And Netanyahu will not want to pass that kind of budget in an election year. So the assumption is that you take the end of March 2026, and somewhere between now and then, Netanyahu will decide to go to early elections, but he will be the one who will want to choose, the agenda for the election. Now, it could very well be, that he will decide that it's good for him to go to elections with a fight with the ultra-Orthodox party, and to present himself as someone who was not willing to give in to their demands vis-a-vis the conscription bill. I don't feel that he has enough or gained enough traction from the 7th of October for him to go to an early election yet. That being said, we could be surprised. Another thing that's going to be on the agenda for the coalition in the upcoming weeks, or after the Knesset recess, will be the attempt to pass bills that have to do with the media. You have the communications minister, Shlomo Karhi, who has been waiting very patiently, or rather impatiently, to pass bills to close down or limit the independence of the Public Broadcast Association. He also has some plans to close the Army radio. So that is going to be on the legislative agenda and Netanyahu has embraced his plans. So that's probably going to be on the legislative agenda for the next few months. And the government is also trying to fire the attorney general. That has nothing necessarily to do with the Knesset, because it's a complicated legal and bureaucratic process. But the government is very keen on moving forward and firing Gadi Rav Miara. So that will probably be at the top of the agenda for the next few weeks as well.
Very interesting. And by the way, I'd be remiss if I didn't remind you and our listeners, the last time you were on, you called it exactly right, that Smotrich would not leave the government, would not leave the coalition, even if there was a ceasefire and hostage deal in Gaza, thereby keeping Netanyahu's government intact. And even Ben-Gvir, he left, but it was kind of understood that he was coming back at some point. So you were right. You were right back then. Tal?
I'm always right, Neri. I'm always right.
This is why we like to have you on for the real for the real tea, for the real dirt. Before we finish up, let's check in with the opposition, such as it is. And I wanted to start with Yair Golan. He's obviously the former deputy IDF chief of staff. He's a very outspoken critic of the government and a hero on October 7th when he went down south by himself to fight and rescue people. He also became a hero in another way last year when he finally merged the two left-wing parties, Labor and Meretz. They're now called the Democrats. Yair Golan is their leader, and they're rising in the polls. So what do you think? Is it for real in terms of the Democrats and Golan?
Well, it's definitely, you can't say anything for real because we have no elections in sight and things can change during campaigns. But the trend is definitely he definitely has gained momentum, and he's the trendiest leader today in the center left. Because he's the newest leader in the center left. I mean, he's competing against Yair Lapid and Benny Gantz, who are both considered, I would say, if I say mildly, failures, each in their own way. And Yair Golan is the only one who hasn't failed yet. Because he has a much more blunt and authentic style. He's not as, polite and lovable as Benny Gantz. And he is considered much more, I think, outspoken than Yair Lapid, who always suffers from, this TV anchor image, while Yair Golan has his military history, which kind of praises him always, everywhere he goes, and the 7th of October heroism. So he is definitely very much representative of the trend. And he's also, I think, representative, the support he's gaining. It just goes to show how fed up, at least the liberal camp is, with attempts to make peace with the other side. Yair Golan is the most combative and, militant leader among all of the opposition leaders. He's closest to the protest leaders. So I think it's real. But again, we're so far away from elections. And I think his popularity, if we stay in the same way we are now, we see Yair Golan, Yair Lapid, and Benny Gantz in the center left, that'll probably continue to gain popularity. But if there are changes by any chance, one of the changes that is being floated in the air is the option that Gadi Eisenkot might, head a joint party that could change the dynamics. So I think it's too early to call, but definitely if Yair Lapid and Benny Gantz stay the way they are, then I do think that he will continue to gain traction.
And I mean, I have to ask, do you think Gadi Eisenkot is built, or put another way, has the political talent to be the figurehead of a center-left merged party list between Gantz and Lapid and whoever else? Do you think Eisenkot can carry that?
I know there are people who are skeptical about Gadi Eisenkot, but I think that he has the ability to appeal to a very broad audience. He comes from a different background, and he has a different authenticity. Like, he's also very authentic. Israelis believe him. And he's also, he's not as blunt as Yair Golan, but he also has a way of saying things that are much more clear cut than Yair Golan and Benny Gantz. And about,
Lapid.
His political, and Yair Lapid, and his political capital, it's about advisors, and it's about putting the right people around you, and it's about wanting. So does he want to do it? I'm not sure that, he will say that he wants to be prime minister. But if he is convinced him leading a party could make a change, I think that he is keen on change, and I definitely can see that something as emergent.
Yeah, there's only the small matter of convincing Benny Gantz to let his number two and running mate be the top leader. Anything is possible in Israeli politics, but that would be a big surprise.
Again, I think it's too early to see how the Israeli Israelis love polls, but they really don't have any meaning right now.
Yeah, I mean, on the issue of polls, and this will be my final question, Tal, Naftali Bennett, the former prime minister, he took a break from politics back in 2022 after his coalition fell apart. Now he's plotting his comeback. And yes, in every poll, this new unnamed party, for now it's just called Naftali Bennett 2026, is doing very well and leading everyone, including Netanyahu and the Likud party. So, I mean, same question to you as before. Is Naftali Bennett for real in terms of his public support, his candidacy to be prime minister? You know, he does, or at least has the ability potentially to kind of straddle both definitely the right and maybe even the center left.
Yeah, so of course, Naftali Bennett is the hottest product on the shelves right now. You can see it in the polls. But
yeah, but
as someone who
the shelf of Israeli politics, it's like a supermarket in 1987 Soviet Union. There's four products.
I'm just old enough to have seen Naftali Bennett spike in the polls and end with 6 seats or not even past the electoral threshold. So
Correct.
Naftali Bennett is always very good in the polls. B, we are not campaigning yet, and Netanyahu and Bennett has been extremely selective about what he says things about and what he doesn't say anything about. For instance, for over a year of the judicial overhaul, Naftali Bennett had nothing to say about that. And even in the hostage deal, he has been, vying away from issues that could cause him damage on each side or cause him to diminish support on each of the political spectrum. But in a campaign, he won't be able to do so. By the way, he also hasn't given an interview to Israeli media and basically since he left. So he hasn't been answered difficult questions. I think his popularity, mainly represents the need or the will or the wishful thinking in Israel for a different leader, someone from the outside. But I'm not sure how it will, if it's sustainable in a campaign. The minute you start a campaign, you'll have to answer questions and give clear answers on them. And it'll be very easy for right wingers or other right wing parties or from the coalition, for instance, to try and eat from his support from the right, and for the center left parties to try and eat from his support from the left. And the minute he loses traction, then, there's something also psychological in Israel amongst the anti-Netanyahu camp, is that whenever someone seems to be the alternative, then just the fact that he's leading in the polls brings more people or more voters or more supporters because they see him as an alternative. But the minute, if Naftali Bennett will not be over 20 seats, then he will not necessarily be perceived as an alternative to Netanyahu. And then some of those votes might go back to other places. Again, we are far away, or at least we might be far away from elections. It also depends on, who is Naftali Bennett going to put on his list? How is it going to look? There's also an option, not much discussed, but because supposedly they put it off the table. But, the most logical thing would be for Naftali Bennett and Avigdor Lieberman to join forces and to create a big right-wing party that would be an alternative for Likud. As long as they run in two different parties, then they once again are actually helping Netanyahu preserve himself as the biggest party instead of trying to challenge him in his own home court.
Correct, and that's also been in the ether, Lieberman and Bennett, but same issue as Gantz and the other side of the political ledger.
Sure.
Is Lieberman going to allow Naftali Bennett to essentially be number one? He's going to have to.
So at the moment, it seems like no, but again, we're not. There's no reason for them to announce anything right now when there aren't any elections, right? So there should be, on both on the center left, as you mentioned, between Yair Lapid and Benny Gantz, and on the right, the anti-Netanyahu right, there should be some strategic thinking and some strategic pressure from the anti-Netanyahu camp to reorganize themselves in a way that they can defeat Netanyahu. Because if the camp remains organized the way it has been in the past few years, and that's the way it is right now, then it'll be very easy for Netanyahu to keep in power. And there's, the way the anti-Netanyahu camp is arranged right now did form a government in 2021, but it fell apart in 2022. They couldn't keep it together. They couldn't win the election, and they couldn't bring down Netanyahu's government. So in my opinion, the main challenge for the anti-Netanyahu camp is to think how to reorganize itself in a strategic way that leads to bringing down Netanyahu. And one of the ways to do that is to stop these stupid divisions, which are only based on personality and not an ideology, and to reorganize the political map.
Yeah, egos, as always, in Israeli politics, do a lot of the work, as opposed to, say, ideology or policy positions. Remains to be seen. And like you said, Tal, elections are not on the horizon anytime soon, most likely. So we'll have to check back in with you when they really are, hopefully sooner rather than later. Let me just wish you and yours Chag Sameach. Hopefully it will be a quiet week next week, Tal, so we can take a break and enjoy it. Enjoy the spring.
Chag Sameach.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, thanks again to Tal Shalev, as always, for her generous time and insights. Also, special thanks to our producer, Jacob Gilman, and to all of you who support Israel Policy Forum's work. Do consider making a donation to Israel Policy Forum so we can keep being a credible source of analysis and ideas on issues such as these that we all care deeply about, including this podcast. And most importantly, thank you for listening, and Chag Sameach to all those celebrating.